Discover how you can green your life by building a knowledge base of current sustainable and eco-savvy trends. This series will delve into hot topics, current standards and practices, ways to design better spaces, and specify materials that benefit not only us as consumers, but the world as a whole. Members of CaraGreen, as sustainable materials distributors, and other industry leaders weigh in throughout the series. This is Build Green, Live Green. Hi, this is Jessica with Build Green, Live Green, the CaraGreen podcast on healthy environmental materials and environmental health in general. So today we are here with Joe Fusco from Casella Waste Systems, and he is the vice president at Casella. And we're connected because I grew up in Vermont, and Casella is a big staple there when it comes to waste systems and recycling. And Joe's got a lot of great insight on recycling today. Thanks for coming, Joe.
Thank you for having me. I'm really tickled to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you too. I think that I've always been really proud of New England and the state of Vermont specifically, having been from there, and now, having moved down to North Carolina, and I've always felt like, Vermont's still my home. My family's all there, and they've always kind of been a leader in the recycling space. I think you would agree that New England in general is kind of a leader in that way.
Yeah, there's a culture here, as you know, that Yankee thrift and that Vermonters sense even of using things over and over again and being very thrifty and careful with resources. So we're proud to have that as part of our DNA, certainly.
And I think, what my first experience with Casella was, it was where we processed our who picked up the garbage, and Vermont, like I said, always had great recycling practices, but in conversations with you, and you're actually connected to a couple of our employees as well through some work that you've done with the University of Vermont, where I also went. And, you've given some talks there. So we thought it would be great to have you here and hear about how waste has changed so much from just being stuff that goes into landfill, to actually being repurposed. And that's how you're connected to CaraGreen, because, you see the value in companies like CaraGreen that take these waste streams and turn them into beautiful, functional building materials.
So our industry has changed a great deal from, say, several decades ago, where it was basically a take-it-away industry. And now it's an industry that kind of is built around the idea that you feed a circular economy and protect the climate and protect the Earth's resources as well. So it's been an evolution for us as well, from what we were at our founding in 1975 until today. The industry has evolved, and I think we've evolved along with it.
One of the things that we talked about that you mentioned that I found really, really interesting was how, several years ago, we started talking about how China stopped taking recycling from the US, which was a huge outlet for a lot of our recycling. And when they did that, it had kind of this domino effect on the industry. Can you talk a little bit about how recycling changed as a result of, China basically saying, I'm not taking your recycling anymore?
So China did change their policy on the kind of recyclables that they would take a few years ago, and it was extremely disruptive to this recycling industry. And more so than it being an issue of change in policy on China's part, it really reminded us that this thing we call recycling is this very complex global system. So even if none of your recyclables ever made it to China, or you were a company that did not sell recyclables to China, this had a ripple effect, as you said, a domino effect through the entire practice of recycling, because suddenly the economics, and this is the most important part, the economics of recycling really collapsed and reminded us that this is really a job of a couple things. One is making recycling economically sustainable so that it continues to deliver the environmental benefits that we want. But it's also reminded us that this is a very delicate system, a very circular system in many ways that, for our purposes today, Jessica, really show us that a company like Casella that recycles is very much tied to a company like CaraGreen, which is on the other side of the curve, so to speak, when it comes to recycling. We're all kind of stakeholders around this large table. And we learn that there are a lot of things that have to go right, a lot of things we have to be very smart about so that we can make sure that recycling stays economically sustainable.
Right. So we see, I think one of the challenges that we had early on in using recycled materials was, people think, well, you got it for free, right? And you're talking about economic sustainability, and people wanted materials with recycled content to be free or cheaper because they thought, we basically went to a curb and picked bottles out, smashed them up, and stuck them in a countertop. And you're right, the complexity of the recycling industry in terms of cleaning and the quality of separation the requirements are really high. We can't give someone a countertop that they're going to eat off of and have it be dirty or contaminated, or glass that's got a film on it that's going to pop out. So, recycling not only has to be very clean, but it has to be very efficient. And I think, from prior conversations, it sounds like, this shift, to looking at our own recycling system really caused some upgrades in technology.
Yeah, it's something that's always, the innovations and technologies are always happening. But I think what's important to point out is how connected we are. So we each have a responsibility to each other in a way. So you and builders and architects and designers and manufacturers are sitting over on that part of the recycling circle or table, what we would call the demand side, right?
Mhm.
So in order for recycling to be sustainable, you have to make sure that demand is there all the time. That demand is
Mhm.
what is making recycling possible. It's what's making recycling sustainable. It's what's making recycling economically sustainable. So you have this responsibility, if you're resource conscious, whether you're a builder, whether you're an architect, whether you're a manufacturer, if you want to play an increasingly important role, you want to be able to, you want to say to yourself, well, I'm going to spec my projects. I'm going to build things that require these materials. That's your responsibility to the economic sustainability of recycling. Over on our side, where there's companies like Casella, local governments, citizens, processors, our responsibility is to continuously deliver a clean, usable, high quality product for you to build great products that are in demand by people, right? So it's in our interest to technologically innovate in the same way it's in your interest to technologically innovate, because the stronger we make this material as a legitimate material that people want to use in their homes, in their offices, in their buildings, then what you have is a true resource loop that benefits the planet, benefits resources, and is economically sustainable.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things to me is, LEED, when LEED first came out, LEED, the building certification, they rewarded recycled content, quite a bit and encouraged it. In subsequent versions, they downplayed it somewhat and kind of buried it inside of a larger credit. But I'm starting to see a shift back in the other direction when people start talking about circularity. So it went from being recycled content to this conversation around, like you said, circular economy. We talk about circular building materials, products that have a take back program and things like that. So it's kind of like recycling 2.0, where you've got, an upgraded technology. So some of our products like Durat and Gelasi, the recycled glass we were talking about, they have a take back program. And sometimes you can take that material, if it's relatively uniform, and recycle it back into itself. Other times when it's a composite, they find themselves making tabletops or trivets or pavers out of it. So, it's hard, but I'm starting to see more and more brands, and certainly the ones that we carry, start to adopt and really implement those circularity programs and not just talk about them. Because for a long time, there was a lot of talk and very little implementation.
Yeah, so I think when we look at the next 20 years, we see the lines between what people would call waste and what people would call resources really blurring, and supply chains as well, really blurring, so that there's this almost true circularity to everything that we do. And I imagine children born today, 20, 30 years from now, will not even think twice about where things come from, because the way we look at supply chains, the way we look at resources, the way we look at waste are almost indistinguishable from each other. They become so blurred and become one and the same.
Well, you mentioned something that you guys do that I find really interesting, which is to go into facilities for some large companies, production facilities, and look at the streams of waste that they may be generating and try to identify places they can go. So, it's not just what, kind of the waste that you're sort of contracted into from a physical standpoint, but it's almost this presumptive waste or actual waste at some of these manufacturing facilities. So can you talk a little bit about that and kind of, I ask from my perspective because I think it would be interesting to get, to be a Casella partner someday and get a phone call that says, hey, I've got this clear acrylic that would be perfect for your elemental line. Can you use it? So, I would love to make the connection between building materials and the waste streams
Oh,
in a much better way. So I ask about that.
absolutely. Absolutely. We would love to make that connection too. But more and more, we're finding manufacturing companies like DuPont, companies like Becton Dickinson, and I'll use them as an example in a minute, really are very, very intentional, very, very committed to having their manufacturing processes produce as little or zero waste as possible. So we work with Becton Dickinson, for example, who's making they make a syringe. They've been very active in this whole vaccination process, a key player, a key supplier in the vaccination process. So they have a facility, they have manufacturing facilities that make plastic syringes. As you can imagine, they have to be perfect. So there's a lot of what you'd call off-spec product, which is just almost pure plastic. What do we do with this?
Mm-hmm.
So we go in and
Mm-hmm.
help them understand how they can eliminate that as a waste, number one. But number two, also finding a way to make it a circular economy for them even. So some of the
Mm-hmm.
waste that they would have from their manufacturing process actually winds up back in their supply chain as a
Mm-hmm.
plastic that they use to make more syringes, for example. So it's really interesting. This is the way the world is going in the future, right? We don't look, we're redefining our relationship to waste, and we're redefining how we look at waste and what we can do with it. So it's very interesting. I think in the future, we're going to see just more and more of that, and certainly would love to see it in the building materials world as well.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I find with Kira Green products is that, our products tell the story, but at the end of the day, the biggest impact is going to be on these big ticket items like concrete, drywall. Some of these materials really getting more recycled content into them so that they have a volume impact. And they're going to have a bigger environmental impact, but it's our products that tell the story. When you walk into a building and this is the countertop and these are Amstel light bottles, or choose your favorite brown bottled beer, Bud Light. Well, actually, I should have pulled something from Vermont. Magic Hat.
Cat has left, just
But
so you know. Magic Hat is no longer here in Vermont.
oh no, what about Long Trail?
Yeah, they're still here. Absolutely, that's a good one.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, so just having that story there, that kind of template that you can use to convey the message about the recycled content. That's what our products are really intended to do. So yeah, we want them to have a positive impact as well, but the idea of being able to, point to something and have it at least be the start of the story and just kind of weave it all together for people is really where I think, our products have had the biggest impact. And to be able to connect it back to what you guys are doing kind of at this global level, to minimize waste is just, I think that making that connection and maturing it and building it and just making it stronger is really going to make this whole industry just gel and come together.
So there's really two sides to that story. So I can sit here and talk about all the innovation or technological advances that are happening from the recycler side so that we can pull more and more material out of the waste stream. We can process it more efficiently, and we can process it more cleanly. That's certainly important. But I would argue that what's really exciting would be to challenge the other side of the circle, which is your side of the circle, which is the builder side of the circle, the architect side of the circle, and the engineer's side of the circle, to be extremely and intentionally innovative in the way we can engineer these products so that they're functionally competitive and perform just as well as what you would say would be traditional building products. So the more innovative an engineer can be about how do we build structures, how do we build interiors of buildings, and if we discover ways to do that using recovered material, that just creates a stronger recycling loop for everybody. So I'd say as much innovation has to happen in the building side, in the engineering side, the architect side, as is happening over here on the recycling side, in the collection side, and the processing side.
That's interesting because I think One of the things I see a lot of on the building and architecture side is kind of 3D modeling and these BIM, like building information modeling, where there's all this information behind the is building information modeling, where there's all this information behind the actual product, so you can see sustainability information, or just there's technical documents and things behind the products. And the more technical documentation there is, it's tending to be recycled content, and all of that. So they're almost being forced into what you're describing, which is to choosing more of those types of products.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm an older guy. So I look at, younger generations here are going to start making those choices deliberately and create the demand for that. They're going to want their houses to be healthier. They're going to want their houses to reflect their values around resource sustainability and sustainability in general. And they're going to want to build them in a different way. And so I think there's a natural cultural shift going on that will create a demand for innovating around building materials, innovating around the way we recycle things. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because this is something that always bothers me. So we've kind of connected it to architects and designers and said, hey, you guys need to design better and make better choices. And these models and stuff are kind of helping them do that, because it's sort of in your face and they're being rewarded for choosing those types of things. And then there's us on the building materials side, who we're driving our partners to incorporate more of these life cycle analysis, health product declarations, environmental product declarations, but really look at the impact of your product overall. And that includes circularity and these take back programs. But me as a consumer, what can our audience is a lot of regular consumers as well. So what can they do differently when it comes to recycling at home to just make the beginning of the process even easier at the consumer
Sure.
level?
It's funny. It's like consumers have a role at each end of the process. At the beginning of the process, to recycle better, to really make sure that they're recycling the things that are actually recyclable, the things that and they're doing it cleanly, and they're delivering a clean product to the curb. On the other end, though, as consumers at the end, they have to start demanding in their home building and in their remodeling specs of material like this. Some of your salespeople showed me or led me to a recycled glass countertop that I think is competitive with granite. So people have to start saying, I want a countertop made out of recycled glass. And to create that demand and create that economic sustainability for products like that is just as important as what people do at home when they're walking out to their garage or their mudroom with an aluminum can or with a, let's say, Long Trail beer bottle.
Yes. Yes, I agree. I get so frustrated when I go to a friend's house or something, and I've been known to rifle through their garbage and recycling and just start putting things in the right bins, because a lot of people think that those flimsy plastic bags have a triangle on them, they can go in the recycling, and they just can't. So there's still a lot of education, I think, that needs to happen on the consumer level. And then also on the contractor side, when you've got someone who cuts stone and they get a new product that comes in that is recycled, they think they can charge double. It takes them the same amount of time to cut it, but they want to upcharge because they think it's fancy. And I think once we take the fancy out of it, you'll start to see that whole supply chain become more economical. And hopefully this all comes together. I know I have 3 kids that they'll rip the waitress a new one if she tries to hand us straws. So we are definitely raising the next generation of consumers.
Yeah, I think each generation will certainly add to the improvement of how we look at resources. That this generation is certainly being educated that way. And so I think real change will happen, certainly in the future. But when these two things, a stone countertop and a glass countertop, are not seen as separate things, they're just two different choices, right? And I think that we'll get there one day. And it's great to see companies like yours and what we would call progressive or forward-thinking architects and builders understand that they can play an extremely important role in resource sustainability and recycling.
Totally agree. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been great. You are a brilliant resource, and I'm excited to see where you guys go, and hopefully we can continue to work together.
I appreciate the time, and it was a fun conversation.
Agreed. This is Jessica with Build Green, Live Green, and our guest, Joe Fusco.